I'm Karen Burns-Booth and I'm a food and travel writer and part of the Viking family. And today I'd like to welcome you to my Lincolnshire Wolds home in England, where I'm going to show you how to prepare and cook some fantastic Egyptian recipes. All of them are very classic and very easy to make at home. I'm going to go through all of the ingredients for you. So if you'd like to follow me into my kitchen, we'll get cooking straight away. So first of all, I'm going to be preparing and cooking kashari, which is a classic Egyptian dish, often sort of like thought of as the national dish of Egypt. And the ingredients are probably very carb on carb heavy, but it is really delicious. And there's a little surprise at the end. I won't tell you about it just yet, but it's presented in a really fabulous way. So one of the main ingredients in it is basmati rice, just normal basmati rice. Then we have macaroni, but it's quite important that you actually source elbow macaroni, which is this little macaroni like that, which looks like little elbows. And then we have brown lentils. You can get these in any health food shop and probably some of the larger supermarkets. So those are the main carbs there and pulses, but we also will be using tomatoes. You just need a tin of chopped tomatoes and also chickpeas. Now you can cook your own dried chickpeas if you've got time, and I sometimes do, and it's nice to have them pre-done, but tinned chickpeas are just as good. We are then going to use a really lovely spice mixture. We've got Baharat spice here, which is a North African, Lebanese, Egyptian spice, which is often put into koftes and meat, but I like to put it in with the lentils and the rice. Cinnamon, another spice which is used extensively throughout Levantine cooking, and also cumin, another classic. And then just to finish off with a little bit of heat, we've got some chili flakes. And of course, herbs, we've got mint and flat leaf parsley, very, very Egyptian, again, right the way through North Africa. And also, I'm just going to show you here some of the vegetables we will be using here. Beautiful big, what I call beefsteak tomatoes, aubergines, eggplant, limes for finishing the dish off, red onion, not yellow onion, and garlic. So I'm just going to rinse the rice, really predominantly not because it's dirty, but just to reduce the starch that's actually on rice, and it helps it cook better. Just pour it into a fine sieve and just simply run cold water over it. That's all you have to do. And they say sieve it or run the cold water until the water runs clear. It's slightly cloudy, just a couple of minutes. If you want, you can then sit it into a bowl and leave it soaking, but I don't think that's necessary. Like I said, it just helps it cook better and it's not so starchy. So that should be good enough. And I'm just going to sit that in a bowl and crack on with my chopping my onions. So the first thing we do for this dish for kashari is simply fry the onions. So good glug of oil in there. In my recipe it says 6 tablespoons, that's about 6 tablespoons. And then your red onion, the ones that we've cut into half moon shapes, go in. And it needs to be hot when you put it in, so you can hear that sizzle. And then also we're going to put a couple of pinches of salt in there as well, which helps caramelise it as it cooks. So a little bit of salt in there. What we're looking for, it says in my recipe it takes about half an hour, which is quite a long time. We're looking for a dark, sticky, fried onion sort of texture at the end. But it's a long time to stand stirring the onion, so what I do is I turn it down slightly and put a lid on. So I've got a non-stick pan here. I've stirred everything around nicely, and I'm now going to just put the lid on, turn it down a bit. I'm using an induction oven here, so it's about 6. Just keep an eye on it. You don't want it to burn. You want it to be sticky and brown, but you certainly don't want it to burn. And just leave that sort of like simmering away, coming back every 5 minutes or so to stir it for about half an hour. Okay, so now we're going to do the second stage. Like I said, this recipe is very easy, but there are several stages. But before we do that, I just want to stir my onions. I don't want them sticking. Lovely there. So although normally you probably fry these without the lid, because obviously the condensation is dropping moisture into it, actually for what I need today, it's just easy for me to just put the lid on, and they eventually will go sticky and brown, I promise you. I just wanted at this stage to say that you might notice my rather lovely red polished nails. These are post-wedding nails because my daughter got married 2 weeks ago. They wouldn't normally be in the kitchen with such lovely nails, but I just thought I'd mention that. It's quite funny. Right, okay, so into the next bit, we're going to fry the garlic. This is the base of this spicy tomato sauce, so a little bit less oil this time, about a tablespoon there. And we're going to put the garlic that we chopped in here. And I might turn that up a little bit. I have to also say I'm just getting used to an induction oven. I've always had a gas hob, but we just moved 10 months ago, so it's all a bit of a learning curve for me. And we're just going to bring the garlic up to a sort of brisk sort of saute. It's just doing, I think. And when it's slightly opaque and coloured, I'm then going to add the next ingredients, which are the tinned tomatoes, a little bit of red wine vinegar, which gives acidity to the tomato sauce, and most essentially, because it's supposed to be a spicy tomato sauce, I'm going to put some chili flakes in there as well. Okay, so these have been simmering, sautéing for about 3 to 4 minutes. I'm now just going to add the tomatoes. It's just 1 tin of tomatoes. And then a little trick that I have, because you need 150 mils of water, is to put your water into the tomato tin, rinse all of the residual tomato in with your water and just pour that in. And that's a nice little tip. And also, for your recycling, you've got a clean tin now, haven't you? So we've got the water in here. We're going to stir that. And then I'm going to add my vinegar. And it's 1.5 tablespoons. So my little, that's about 1.5, so that's fine. I'm using red wine vinegar. Several recipes state white wine or red wine, but I quite like the depth of the red wine vinegar. I'm also using an organic one, which I think has a cleaner taste, but you don't have to, obviously. And then we need just a little pinch of salt, maybe just a bit more. I'd just like to point out at this stage, you can use any salt you like, sea salt. I'm using low salt because we're trying to reduce salt in our diet, and I think it's quite important to point out that this works equally well in cooking as normal sort of table salt or sea salt. And then finally, those fantastic smoky chili flakes are going to go in. I'm just going to turn the heat up to about 7 on the induction here. Stir that, and I'm just going to then walk away and let it do its thing, just like I'm doing the onions. So we'll just put a lid on that. It's going to sort of simmer away quite nicely. What we're looking for is a nice pulpy sauce, but enough that's actually going to keep the rest of the ingredients moist and sort of wet and delicious when we come to serve it. And one more time, a little stir of the onions here. So for people who have gas, as I always have, I would say that 5 would be just sort of like a sort of low to under medium flame, and that would definitely be a medium, just slightly under high flame. And that's how I would say it, just, you know, that's how I would cook on gas. I'm going to just turn this down because it's just simmering a bit too much at the moment. I'm going to turn it down to 5, like the onions at the back, which again, on gas, as I mentioned, is just a sort of like slightly low to under medium flame. Okay, so next step, I did tell you this was a recipe in many stages, but I would just like to point out that these 2 stages here, the onions and the tomato sauce, can be made ahead, so you don't have to have this sort of crowded hob top that I've got here. We're going to do the lentils and the macaroni next, but it's lentils first. I've got a nice big Le Creuset, big earthenware pot here, Dutch oven, as some of you will know it as. It needs to be big and roomy because you're going to cook 2 items in here and add the chickpeas at the end. And to start off with, I'm going to add these brown lentils into the pan, and then I'm going to cover them with cold water. They just need to be covered, maybe a little bit above it. A little bit of salt I'm going to add, not too much because everything has been salted. We just need just like a pinch like that. Stir it. Make sure that nothing's stuck to the bottom of the pan. There should be enough water in there. And this is another simmer, 20 minutes, walk away, let it do its thing. So I'm just going to put, before we actually add the macaroni, you must cook the lentils first. You can use tinned lentils, and I probably would have used them today because you can get fabulous tinned brown lentils in the supermarkets as well as health food shops. But I just happen to have some dried ones in the pantry, so I've gone ahead with the dried lentils. They cook in about 20 minutes. I would come back every 5 minutes to make sure they haven't stuck to the bottom, and you might need to add a bit more water. You'll definitely have to add a bit more water when you add the macaroni at the later stage. So that's stage 3. And whilst I'm here, I just want to show you, we've got this on a very low heat at the back, like I said. So the onions now are literally just not even quite simmering. As you can see, they're sort of nice and sticky. I might increase the heat towards the end so they get slightly crispier, but that isn't although you can actually serve crispy onions at the end as a sort of extra sort of garnish. We're looking for sticky and brown basically in those onions. And I'm just going to check on the tomato sauce. And that for me is probably done, because I don't want it to reduce too much, because we're talking about chickpeas, rice, lentils and macaroni. We don't want everything to be dry. So I'm now going to turn the heat off for the tomato sauce at the back and just leave it on the residual heat on top of the hob there. So that's going off. Keep the lid on, obviously. And we're down to just two pans here, just sort of cooking away before we go into the next stage of adding the macaroni and the chickpeas. But I just actually did want to show you some crispy fried onions that I did a couple of days ago, which is also can be used as a garnish for this dish. You can buy them in specialist shops like health food shops, but I actually started these off on the hob top, as you've seen with the other onions, and I used one of my rather fantastic sort of air fry machines that has a dehydrate setting on it, and I dehydrated them. And you can keep them in an airtight container for possibly 2 to 3 weeks. But I thought it was nice to show you that, because if you haven't got time to do the whole onion part of this dish, and I will show you at the end how I'm actually going to garnish our dish today with them. Okay, so just checking the lentils. And they are cooking really well. They're doing their thing. But I think because they've got about another 5 minutes to cook, I'm actually just going to test one. I'm squeezing it between my finger. I know it's going to be a bit hot, but I've got asbestos fingers. You can always... They're pretty much there, but they need about another 3 to 4 minutes. And because I'm adding the macaroni, I'm actually going to add another 150 mils, a quarter pint of water. And at this stage, because they are just about done, I'm actually going to add the macaroni now as well, and then put the lid on, and that will just sort of simmer away quite nicely. I'll probably turn it down, but I'll let you know. So the macaroni is going in. Nice stir. And as you can see, you don't need a huge amount of water, because what happens is everything cooks in the water and it all reduces down, and so you don't have to drain it, and that's the whole point. This is probably this is the simplest part of the stage, because you don't actually add the spices or anything to this. The spices go into the rice. We've already got spice in the tomato sauce, etc. So stir it around. So the macaroni needs 10 minutes. That's what it says on the packet of macaroni that I used. Obviously, it's very much a sort of movable feast. Check the macaroni cooking time on your packet, but mine said 10 minutes. So I will come back in 5 minutes. There's plenty of water in there, but I'll come back in 5 minutes to check to make sure it hasn't caught at the bottom and then it's cooking all right. So lid on, and I think I'm going to turn it down 1 notch. So down to 4. about medium, just slightly under medium on gas, because this induction goes up to 9, so 9 would be like a full flame for me. Tomato sauce is done. This has just been doing its thing in the background, but as I told you, I want it to be slightly crispier, although I can use the dehydrated onions that I showed you earlier. So what I might do now is, for the next 5 minutes, is take the lid off, because that's obviously the condensation is dropping down there. And I'm going to turn it up to about 6, which is just above a medium flame on gas, and come back and stir it. So I used 2 large red onions. They do cook down. If, like myself, you're a bit of an onion fiend, add more. But like I said, I've got those wonderful dehydrated crispy onions I can add as well. So as you can see, it's sizzling already. So just make sure you come back to it. You don't want it to burn. We've got this lovely sticky, unctuous, sort of lovely rich onion thing here. And this is the end of stage 3, and we're going to stage 4 before we actually serve the dish, this kashari. And I hope that these stages haven't put you off, because like I said, so much of it can be done ahead of time. And you could probably even cook your lentils and macaroni ahead of time, and just microwave, reheat things before you want to assemble it. So it is possible. It is very much street food, Egyptian street food. Like I said to you before, it's the sort of classed as one of Egypt's sort of national dishes. You will see it in the streets of Luxor or Cairo, and it will be served in very many sort of variations, different ways. It is vegetarian, and you can make it very easily vegan by obviously using vegetable oils, and it goes with lots of sort of like rich meat dishes that the Egyptians like koftas and sort of like, you know, sort of kebabs and things like that. I think it's a lovely dish, and I think it's worthy of any special sort of tea time table, supper table, and yeah, one of my favourites. So just stirring the onions again. You can hear them sizzling. I'm probably going to leave the lid off now and turn this down a bit further just to carry on. Just getting a sort of bit of crispness there. So turn that down to about number 3. Already you can stop this, you can hear the sizzle stopping, and 3 is like a sort of like low flame. And I'm just going to leave that like that now while I go and sort of get my rice and stock and all the other ingredients for stage 4 of this fabulous dish. So I'm just going to take the stock and the spices around, which goes into the rice, which is stage 4, because the chickpeas, lentils and macaroni is nearly cooked. So the spice mix I talked about before, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the stock. There's 300 millilitres here, which is half a pint. And I use a bouillon powder, which is sort of low sodium, because there's quite a lot of seasoning going on in this dish. So if you can get a low sodium, low salt bouillon powder, that's probably the best way of doing it, or natural vegetable stock. So the lentils and the macaroni is cooked. It's just about right. There's hardly any liquid left. It's just starting to stick at the bottoms. I've just got here in time. I'm just going to add the chickpeas. In the recipe, I do say 2 tins, but it's quite a hefty dish, so I'm actually putting in 1 tin this time because I think that's enough. Just see how it looks when I mix it through. Might add a bit more, but there's quite a lot going on here. This recipe will feed 6 to 8, but as part of like a meze style sort of dinner, supper. Probably feed maybe slightly more actually. So I think that's about the right ratio there, but 1 tin of chickpeas to the lentils and the macaroni. I'm going to decant this into another bowl and cover it with foil to keep warm, because I'm now going to use this same pot for the rice. So let's turn this off, and I'm just going to pop over here to put it into a bowl to keep warm. Just spooning this into a bowl, because it's just easier to use this sort of this pan here for the rice, sort of going through so many pans. And then I'm going to cover it in some tin foil to keep warm. If necessary, I can always take the tin foil off if it hasn't kept warm, and reheat it in the microwave. But I just would like to point out that lots of Mediterranean dishes, Levantine, North African dishes, aren't served piping hot. It's normal to serve them at room temperature tepid. That's the way they're served. Obviously not meat dishes so much, but it was a bit of a surprise when I first moved to Cyprus, where I ran a restaurant actually for a few years, is that we would sort of sit down to lovely sort of Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot meze, and the so-called cooked dish would be room temperature and not piping hot. But I think there's a method in their madness, is because when food cools off a bit, the flavour is more pronounced. If you think about, if you've ever sort of woke up in the morning and thought, I'll just have a little bit of cold lasagna, often your taste sort of like spicier than maybe the day before, or pizza, or even curry. So, but not to worry too much about it. I'm going to get everything out of here. Just rinse the pan briefly before I go on to the cook the rice, which has all the spices in, you might remember as well. So there we are. So that's all decanted in here. Just pop some tin foil over the top. You're probably thinking that's a bit crumpled. I'm very, very thrifty, and I keep as much as I possibly can. And that's just worked perfectly today, actually keeping this warm whilst we go on to the final stage and before we serve this delicious dish. Okay, so stage 4, we've finally got to the last stage. So I've got my trusty Le Creuset cocotte pan on the heat. I've got it on 5, by the way, which is sort of just over a medium flame. 2 tablespoons of oil. This is the same pan that I cooked the lentils in. I just gave it a quick sort of swill. And then, just as if you were starting off a curry where you release the aromas of the spices, rice goes in. And this is the rinsed and drained rice that you saw me doing earlier on. So that goes in, and all of the spices, the baharat, the cumin and the cinnamon goes in as well. So this is where we start layering up the spices. We've already got chilli in the tomato sauce, and of course we've got onions. So just might just increase that heat a bit up to a 6, and just stirring it over the heat all the time. And the whole reason for this is actually to dry the rice off. It sounds a bit curious, you're going to dry it off before you add stock. Dry the rice off with the spices, and I wish there was a smellometer, because I can smell the spices now. Then you're infusing the spices, you're releasing the aromas, all the oils, because spices have natural oils in them, and it just creates a nice sort of cleaner, sharper, more aromatic sort of dish. So we'll do that for about a minute or 2. You have to stir all the time, obviously, because it's dry, you're dry frying. And then we're going to add this fabulous vegetable bouillon that I talked about earlier on, vegetable stock, to the pan, stirring well. There we are. And I'm now going to pop the lid on. So I've stirred everything in, it's all amalgamated. We've got the stock in there, spices and the rice. And by the way, all these recipes will be online for you to actually follow, but I think it's about 1.5 teaspoons of each spice. It's a real sort of heavy spice layer, because if you remember rightly, the chickpeas, lentils and macaroni didn't have any spices in, and of course the chilli goes in here. So we're going to bring this up to the boil. So I'm going right up to 9 on my induction, which is like well, I'm going to try to go right up to 9 on my induction to tell you it's new. And we're going to leave the lid off until it comes to the boil. There we are, 9. So bring that right up. It's starting to simmer already. As soon as it comes to the boil, I'm going to whack it right down to about 2 or 3, put the lid on and walk away and just let it cook for 10 minutes. And do not peek at rice ever when you put the lid on, because it's actually on a low heat. It's just sort of doing its thing in there. So you might be able to hear that. That's coming up to a nice, I want a rapid boil. I want it really to be sort of like bubbling. and then I'll turn it down. It doesn't harm at this stage. Never stir rice after the lid's on either, by the way. Never stir it. Just going to stir it now though before I put the lid on. So that's a nice boil there. I'm going to turn it right down now to about number 2. Maybe start it off on 3. Put the lid on, and that's it. Walk away 10 minutes. Do not peek. You never peek at rice, and don't ever stir it either. There's all sorts of ways of cooking rice. Sometimes I would actually cook it for 10 minutes and then take the lid off and put a tea towel over it if I wanted to keep it warm. But we're going to be serving this straight away, so there's no need. That's stage 4. So I'm going to just pop off now and get some serving platters ready so we can actually present this wonderful kashari, this Egyptian dish, before we move on to the next recipe, which is going to be another classic Egyptian recipe, another classic, another so-called national dish of Egypt, which is full madamas. I always used to call it full madams because it's spelled M-E-D-A-M-E-S, but I was told quite firmly recently on a Viking River cruise in Egypt that it's full madamas. And full means bean, and so that's where the beans come in. It's actually made with fava beans. So we're going to be doing that next before we move on to a classic that most of you will know, but I'll show you how to make it, whiz it up in the kitchen, and that's baba ganoush, which is made with aubergines and eggplant. So walking away from this now, 10 minutes, might have a little coffee break actually, and then we'll go and get some platters and we can serve this wonderful dish up. Okay, so everything's all done. The rice is finished cooking. We've done the onions, we've done the tomato sauce, and we've done the chickpea, lentil and macaroni as well. So presentation of this is quite dramatic actually. What I'm actually going to do is start layering everything up into a fairly largish pudding bowl. I probably could go a bit bigger. This is what is classed as a 2-pint pudding bowl. You probably need a 4-pint one for the amount that we've actually cooked today. But that doesn't matter because you can serve this kashari in many different ways. The more dramatic way is to layer it up and then turn it out, which we're going to do. But there will be some left, and then you get a platter and you sort of like arrange it in layers on there, because the whole point is that you sort of like eat everything all together. But I thought it'd be very nice to show you the layered up method in a pudding basin. So if you haven't got a pudding basin, we're looking at any kind of basin shape. Like I said, this is about a 2-pint pudding basin, which is just under a litre. But you could also use a mixing bowl as well, or something like that. And we're going to start with the onions. So here are the onions that we cooked earlier. It's basically everything that you've cooked in order almost. So we're going to start off by putting these sort of sticky brown onions in the base, like so. And by all means, add all the oil as well, because it just keeps everything moist, like so. So these are the red onions that we cooked right at the beginning, stage 1. Just flatten them out, like so. It's always amazing. There are 2 huge onions here, but don't worry, we have got the garnish to go on as well. So that's the first layer. And I'll just pop over to the cooker and get the tomato layer, which goes in next. Everything you might notice is being layered up almost in the way that it was cooked, actually exactly in the way it was cooked. So we started off with the onions, then we did the tomatoes, then we did the lentils and the macaroni and the chickpeas, and finally the rice will come on last, and then we'll invert it onto the plate and hopefully it will unmould into this really lovely dramatic centerpiece for any table. Layer 3, just been kept warm here with a tin foil on it. Now you'll see that we've probably got too much to go in here. Like I said, there's different ways of serving kashari. I'm doing these sort of like the unmoulded way. So I'm going to put probably about half of this in. And the rice then goes on next. At this stage, we need to start trying to pack it down. So hopefully, this is always very nerve-wracking when you turn it out. You think, oh crikey, I hope it's going to stay. Every time I've done it up to now, before filming, it has done, but keep fingers crossed it does today. Moving it around. This is the lentil, chickpea and macaroni layer here. So start packing that down a bit. See if I can just get a bit more. And I've still got the rice to go, so I don't want to go too mad with it. Like I said, I probably used about half. Packing it down like that. And that should be about enough because I need to put the rice on top. So don't worry about all this that's left over. I can make a kashari platter with it. I can do all sorts of other things with it. I can add a tomato sauce to it. It's not going to go to waste. And of course, had I used a bigger basin, I probably would have used all of it. So now onto the rice layer. So this is the rice. It's cooked about 15 minutes ago now. And I always like to put a tea towel on it. It helps absorb any extra moisture in there. As you can see, it's quite highly coloured because we've got all of the spices in there, but this is the only spiced layer apart from the chilli tomato sauce. So this is the last layer that goes on. It's slightly sticky, the rice, which is fine because, like I said, it's all part of this layered thing. But we'll take this over and put it as the last layer on the kashari over there. Last spoon here, just padding this right round. I can feel that it's quite firm now. Just pressing it in. It's exactly as if you were moulding a jelly almost. Obviously, we haven't made a jelly, so I'm just patting that in right now in the hope, like I said before, that when I mould it, it's not going to run everywhere. And that's the final layer, like so. Just let it sit for a minute, just to sort of settle, and then we'll unmould it. So I've actually brought out a sort of more of a sort of like shallow bowl to actually turn it onto, because just in case it doesn't unmould quite the way I want to, but it'll all taste delicious. So basically you invert your bowl, your plate over the top like so, and then very carefully slide it to the end of the table or work surface. And this is the tricky bit, and turn it over like that. I was quite surprised I did it quite smoothly like that. And then we simply unmould it. So not quite unmoulded the way I want it, but it's pretty much as it would be served over there in Egypt anyway. So first of all, I'm going to sprinkle some of these lovely dehydrated fried onions over the top. Like I said, you can make them yourself or you can buy them in specialist shops. And they do like onions in that sort of region, so that's just about right. You can always put these on the table as well so people can help themselves. It's a really nice thing to do. And I've got some flat leaf parsley here. Just cut from the garden actually because I grow it. I've just wiped it, rinsed it off. With some kitchen scissors, I'm going to snip the parsley over, and now we can start seeing just how really pretty this dish looks. And of course, flat leaf parsley, more than curly parsley, is the parsley that is used in North Africa, Levantine sort of area. And as you can see, it's absolutely lovely now. There's sort of this tomato, the red coming through, the green, and you can see the pasta coming through, and then the surprise of the spiced rice at the bottom that people will get to when they get to the bottom layer. And then because I love it, and it's also a herb which I very much identify with that region, I'm just going to snip off the top floret of the mint and pop it there as a garnish, and then just very roughly snip the rest of it over. So we've got flat leaf parsley and mint, and the smell is absolutely fabulous. So that there is the presented dressed kashari dish. Probably better in a bowl, so shallow bowl rather than a plate, just in case it doesn't unmould completely. People would eat that room temperature, not too cold, but sort of tepid. And you would encourage people to spoon right through to the bottom so they get every single layer there, so it's a complete dish. I'm going to serve this today with baba ganoush, which I'm going to show you how to make a little bit later. But next on the menu, I'm actually going to show you how to make full madamas with all of the sort of like bits and pieces that go with it. This sort of sliced cucumber and tomato and eggs, and that will be served in bowls, again with probably some more of this flat leaf parsley and mint, and you can also serve yogurt. I'm going to serve yogurt on the side with this as well. So it's going to be a rather lovely lunch for us. I've already pre-made some spiced lamb kofta meatballs in a tomato sauce. I will share the recipe with you. They've been pre-done, but we'll put them on the table, so we'll have a complete Egyptian feast going on. So on to the next recipe, and this is a classic as well. You'll find this all through Egypt, and it's one of their most famous, and other North African countries. Full madamas, and as I was told, not full madame, but full madamas, as somebody told me. So just going through the ingredients, the main ingredient is the tinned fava beans. You can, at a pinch, use broad beans, but it's really not quite the same thing. But you can get fava beans dried fava beans. Or tinned like this. You will have to go to a speciality shop to get tinned ones. Again, health food store, and you can get them online as well. And I've gone for the tinned ones today because the dried ones do take a long time to cook, and you have to soak them overnight. So one tin, one red onion, which I've chopped, one tomato, again I've been chopped, the juice of half a lime, olive oil, salt, and our old friend cumin again. And we're going to start by frying half of the onion in olive oil with the cumin, and then we'll go on to the next step, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, right, so the first step is frying the onion with the cumin. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So we switched to olive oil this time from rapeseed oil, which we used last time in the other recipe. And then it's half the onions, just half the onions going in, like so. And then a teaspoon of ground cumin, not quite a teaspoon there. And just bring it up to fairly high heat. You can start to hear it sizzling now. And we saute this until the onions are soft. So about 2 to 3 minutes. And again, we're releasing those essential oils in the ground cumin. All spices have oils in them. And cooking it alongside the onions. And anybody who does a base curry mixture, or sort of like makes their own curry, sort of like powder, etc., will know that you always fry your spices to release the aroma and the oils before you actually start progressing by adding the liquid in. So not quite dry frying here because we've got olive oil in it. So that will just simmer away, saute there sort of quite happily for 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll go on to the next step. And I've got it on 8 on induction to start off with. I might actually move that down now. I can hear it sizzling to about 6. And that's just over a medium flame and gas. And you have to keep stirring all the time for 2 to 3 minutes. The smell is absolutely fantastic. So we'll come back to that in a minute, and I'll tell you what happens next. So back over to the hob here, and the drained fava beans. I'm going to add both tins because we're making enough for 4 people. Give it a stir. And the second tin. And then just like I did before with the tomatoes, you might remember the chopped tomatoes, I need about 150 to 200 mils of water. So I'm just going to top up this tin with the water and bring it back over here and add it to the pan. So adding the water now. And we just leave this just simmer for about 5 minutes before we actually go to the next stage. So it's been simmering for 2 to 3 minutes. I can smell it, it's delicious. The cumin is just such a lovely aromatic spice. So I'll give it a bit of a stir. And now it's time to add the other half of onion, the remaining onion, and 1 chopped tomato, which is going in there now. Give that a stir. And add the lime juice. And about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. That should be about it. And we're going to let that simmer for about a minute, and then we're going to actually take it off the heat and mash the beans actually in with the vegetables. We just need to the onions aren't cooked fully, neither is tomato. It just adds texture and colour to it. So I'm just going to leave that simmer for a minute with the lid on, and we'll come back to that, and then I'll show you how you mash it. You actually just mash it actually with a potato masher. You don't need a handheld whisk, you don't need a food presser, you just mash it down. And if you haven't got what I call a mashed potato sort of masher, then just use the back of a fork just to sort of squash some of the beans down. So we'll leave that there for a couple of minutes anyway. Okay, so this has just come off the hob and smelling lovely. And I'm going to do the mashing now. So the whole point is that you just get a, like I said, a mashed potato masher, and just mash the beans. You're not going to be able to mash all of the vegetables with it, but that's exactly what you're supposed to be getting, like a chunky texture. Just mash it down. And it'll become almost like a thick, almost like a puree kind of consistency. And I'd just like to say at this point that full madamas is served mainly at breakfast time, but also lunch, with all of the accompaniments that I might have mentioned before, which is sliced cucumber, sliced tomato, lime juice, and boiled eggs, which I've already boiled, but I'll have to peel them, and lots of chopped parsley on it. And it's the Egyptian version of what I would call chicken noodle soup that people consider to be like something when you're not feeling very well, although they do eat it every day. It's proper comfort food. I don't want to mash it completely. I still want a few of the beans to be sort of like it's discernible, so to be whole. So I'm just going to show you the kind of texture you'd be looking for. So it's like a thick, soupy, sort of chorba kind of sort of almost like a stew, and that's the texture we're looking for. I can smell it, it's absolutely delicious, and it just goes so well with all of the little bits and pieces that we're going to serve with it later. Right, so that's it, it's all done. Really quick, simple recipe. I've chopped the tomato and the cucumber up. I've peeled the eggs, I pre-boiled them, and it was a 6-minute egg, they're a hard-boiled egg. Halved and quartered them, and you're looking for a sort of roughly quartered egg, sort of, you really want the sort of yolk and the white to sort of like break up almost, you can mix it in. I've just chopped some flat leaf parsley in here, and I will serve it with some extra parsley on top. And there will be lime wedges also to squeeze on it when you serve it. So basically, you put this into a bowl, you top it with the egg, your tomato and your cucumber, squeeze lime juice on it, and away you go. And that is full madamas. Right, so on to the third recipe that I'm showing you today, and that's baba ganoush, which is, you probably all know, it's North African, Middle Eastern, Levantines sort of classic. So what I've got here are 2 large fat aubergines that I've actually cooked in the oven until they've almost charred on the outside and collapsed. And the recipe and how to do this will be online. And I've done this already because it just takes quite a while for them to actually do that, to get to that stage. Rub them in olive oil and salt, put them into a hot oven. The best way actually is to do it on a barbecue or over an open flame if you have a gas hob, but they're ready to go. We will need olive oil, tahini, lemon or lime juice. I'm going with limes today. There's be salt in there and garlic, and those are just all you need for the ingredients for baba ganoush, which I'm about to show you how to make. The only cooking is the actual roasting of the aubergines. Everything else is just a matter of an assembly job, to be honest with you. And it makes the most wonderful smoky sort of sesame kind of dip. Great with flatbreads, pita bread, and a wonderful accompaniment to go with all of the other recipes that we've actually made today. So I'm going to work my way around to the other side of the kitchen if you'd like to follow me, and we'll get going on this one then. Okay, so I've got the diced garlic in here. I put 2 cloves in there. And here is one of my aubergines, which has been pre-cooked, like I said, pre-roasted. It's try and get all the olive oil in there as well. So I'm just going to scoop out the filling. You can see it's all cooked. It's almost like a pulp already. Help with your hands if you like. You have to get up close and personal with this kind of thing. Squeeze out all of the pulp in the middle. It's a bit messy, like that. You want a clean skin. You want all the pulp taken out. There we are. Takes a little while. You have to get all the black off as well. You don't want any black in there. Take that out. These were 2 large aubergines. And like I said, the recipe will be online, but I basically roasted them because unfortunately it's not barbecue weather here at the moment. I probably would have flame grilled them in the summer over the barbecue or over a gas hob. You can just hold them with a fork and just actually flame them. So that's pretty much empty, that one. I'll just go and make sure I've got all the pulp there. So that's what you'll get. Right, on to the second one. This one hasn't broken up, so it'd be easier to get the pulp, the flesh out. Stripping all the outside off, just going with it. I started off with a spoon, to be quite frank. It's much easier just to use your hands. Just pulling all the pulp out. That's not skin, by the way, it's just discoloured where it's next to the actual skin. It smells, it's peculiar because it's not been anywhere near smoke, but because I've actually charred it in the oven with olive oil and a little bit of salt, it smells smoky, which is strange. So right, that's stripping it all out, and that's pretty much that one done. And we'll come back in a minute and chop that up. Okay, so now we've got the pulp here and the garlic, and I'm just going to sort of like roughly chop it. Look, it's just so easy. You don't need to worry. You're looking for a sort of like a smooth sort of lump. Well, you don't want a lumpy, smooth sort of puree almost. It's already been cooked. Just mixing it up like that. 2 schools of thought: the very smooth baba ganoush and the slightly sort of textured one. I'm in the latter party. I like a bit of texture. So there we are. We're going to add 3 teaspoons of olive oil, which is a tablespoon. So adding that now. And also 3 teaspoons of tahini. So again, a tablespoon, like so. Mix that up together. I absolutely love tahini, not just in sort of Middle Eastern dishes, but also fantastic in biscuits, cookies as well. It's great. And a teaspoon added to any winter stew or casserole just adds a little bit of depth, and nobody would ever know what it was. So mixing that in. And then the juice of half a lemon or lime. Now I've actually already quartered these, so I'm going to use 2. Making sure that I don't get any pips in there. I think these are no pips in here. So, and another one. The smell is absolutely captivating. That's the thing about Egyptian cuisine, North African cuisine in general, is that the use of lime and garlic and herbs, spices, the way they use it, it's just so fragrant. It's like the fragrant kitchen, right? And that's pretty much the texture that I'm looking for here. I'll just mix a bit of this tahini back in, like that. I'm going to leave it in this dish. This serves 4 people as part of a sort of meze, you know, for dips. But if you wanted to be a bit generous, I'd use 4 aubergines because you see how they sort of collapse. What I want to be doing now is actually drizzling a bit more olive oil on the top, like that. And grabbing a little bit of flat leaf parsley. You don't need to get the scissors, just tearing it up and and sort of scattering it over like that. Maybe a little bit more. And when they're in season, pomegranate seeds look lovely on here and a great way to actually serve it. So that is it. That is baba ganoush, another Egyptian, North African speciality. Great when you smear it onto hot flatbreads or pita breads. Very simple, very easy. And of course, the great thing about this is, apart from the fact it'll keep really well in the fridge for 4 or 5 days, you can cook your aubergines ahead of time and just keep them in the fridge so that for an impromptu sort of like meze evening, you can just get them out and whiz it up. It doesn't need to be hot. It's not a hot dish. And there we are. Very simple, very easy. And that is the last dish I'm demonstrating today. But I would like to show you what I've already made, which is part of our Egyptian feast today, which is spicy meatball kofta meatballs in a tomato sauce. The recipe will be shared online. And I'm just going to go and get those. I've cooked them, they're reheated, they're smelling and looking delicious. So I'll just go and bring them over and show you what they look like. Thanks very much for viewing tonight. I hope you really enjoyed watching me preparing all this fabulous Egyptian food. I've absolutely loved sharing it with all of you, and I can't wait to be back on Viking.TV sharing something else. But for now, it's goodbye, because I'm going to sit back at the table and tuck in with all my friends. So see you next time.